Tonight, we begin with a revelation that congressional investigators had feared, education watchdogs had predicted, and union members themselves had long suspected. A disclosure that unfolded not over years of slow investigation, but in a single filing, one document that exposes millions in hidden transfers, one document that traces money from classroom dues to political activism, one document that names names, dates, and dollar amounts. What the nation's largest teachers' union did with member dues cross a line that federal oversight committees had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, investigators did not hesitate. They responded with subpoenas, with hearings, and with demands for full financial transparency. For years now, there had been whispers, not official complaints, not formal audits, just whispers that the union leadership was preparing something beyond traditional collective bargaining. The union has been political, yes, but they have been strategic in their politics. Their financial moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a pattern. But what set off alarm bells in congressional oversight committees this week was that the pattern went silent. Analysts who monitor nonprofit financial disclosures know the indicators. The quarterly reports filed on Schedule the Donor, disclosures matching previous years to line items, adding up to expected totals to sudden gaps in documentation. All of that went quiet. And whenever a major organization goes quiet on its finances, it means something is about to surface. The union, which represents over 3 million educators nationwide, has always maintained that member dues fund professional development, legal protection, and classroom resources. But critics have long questioned whether those dollars stay in the classroom or flow somewhere else entirely. For years, that question remained unanswered, until now. Early this week, investigative journalists working with congressional oversight staff detected what they described as significant financial irregularities in recently unearthed IRS filings, including transfers that had not been publicly disclosed in over a decade. These are the kinds of financial movements that major nonprofits only execute when they are signaling something very specific: political realignment, organizational restructuring, or deliberate obfuscation. Investigators didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the union was changing its financial posture. And when an organization representing millions of public employees shifts its financial posture without explanation, even by small margins, federal regulators pay attention. The filing, obtained through Freedom of Information requests and cross-reference with state-level disclosures, reveals a pattern of transfers totaling tens of millions of dollars over a 5-year period. The destinations? Organizations that critics describe as far-left activist groups. Entities focus on political mobilization, voter registration drives in targeted districts, and policy advocacy that extends far beyond education. These weren't random donations. These weren't emergency relief funds. These were systematic, recurring, and deliberately structured transfers. The response issued by the House Oversight Committee tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Committee members, after an emergency briefing, described the union's financial activity as deliberately opaque, potentially in violation of nonprofit disclosure requirements, and perhaps most importantly, a betrayal to 3 million dues-paying members who believe their money funded education. But financial secrecy only works if no one looks closely. Investigators did. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive oversight actions we've seen in the education sector in years. Here's what we know. Within 72 hours of the filing becoming public, the committee issued formal document requests to the union's national headquarters. These weren't the routine annual disclosure requests. These were targeted subpoenas, legal instruments that congressional investigators only deploy when they are preparing to build a formal case. The committee is demanding complete records of all transfers exceeding $50,000 internal communications regarding political expenditures board meeting minutes discussing allocation of member dues and correspondence with any organization receiving funds tonight. Sources confirm that investigators have identified transfers to at least 14 organizations, including groups that had recently been flagged by watchdogs for what analysts believe was coordinated political activity. The union moved money before disclosure deadlines could catch up. They funded voter mobilization efforts. They funded policy advocacy campaigns. They funded media organizations that were likely preparing to amplify specific political narratives. In other words, the union targeted the infrastructure of political influence, the connective tissue that would make their agenda operational. This is what made the committee's response so urgent. The union's financial strategy wasn't just political, it was systematic. It represented the kind of spending that could shape elections if left unchecked. And investigators, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't target individual teachers. They didn't attack the concept of collective bargaining. They hit the financial networks. They hit the transfer mechanisms. The focus is narrow but devastating. Follow the money, document the trail, expose the destinations. And here's where the story becomes even more troubling. Sources now believe that the union's latest financial moves were designed to test the limits of nonprofit disclosure laws after years of regulatory indifference. The union wanted to see whether oversight bodies would look away. But instead, the opposite happened. Investigators didn't ignore the irregularities. They launched a coordinated response that was so swift, so comprehensive, that even the union's legal team noticed. You don't get the attention of a 3 million member organization easily. But today, congressional investigators did. Former nonprofit compliance officers speaking with media under anonymity described the union's financial structure as layered, a way to create distance between member dues and ultimate expenditures. But investigators proved today that they remain both capable and motivated. Their document requests were not only comprehensive, they were targeted so precisely that they named specific transactions, dates, and receiving organizations. That specificity matters because it shows investigators already have significant information. It shows that congressional oversight is not reacting blindly. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of the financial activity. State-level affiliates carried out parallel transfers, forcing investigators to expand their inquiry to multiple jurisdictions. Subsidiary organizations targeted grants that had been established in the last 3 years. PACs operating in swing states reportedly received funding used by the union to influence targeted races. This wasn't just political spending. This wasn't just advocacy. This was infrastructure building. This was influence architecture. And influence architecture is the one thing the union has struggled to defend since the disclosure went public. For every explanation they have offered, investigators have countered with something that complicates their narrative. Remember, the union thought their financial structure was secure. They thought layered transfers would prevent tracing. They thought political allies would provide cover if questions arose. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Their financial structure is being mapped in real time. Their transfers are being traced to final destinations. Their political allies are distancing themselves from the controversy. What makes this moment so significant and so volatile is that the union's financial exposure happened at a time when their leadership is under unprecedented pressure. Progressive members want more aggressive political action. Moderate members want focus on traditional union priorities. Younger educators want transparency and democratic participation. Parents want accountability for how education dollars are spent. Union leadership is balancing these demands while defending practices that now appear indefensible. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The committee's statement, now circulating across major news outlets, was designed to signal that Congress is not willing to allow nonprofit status to shield political spending. Officials said plainly that the union's financial practices were inconsistent with the transparency expected of tax-exempt organizations. That is congressional language for, "We believe laws may have been broken." You don't usually hear that tone from oversight committees unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the parent advocacy groups addressed the media in a measured, determined statement tonight. She said, "Teachers trusted this union with their hard-earned money." She said, "They did not consent to funding political activism." And she said, "We will not rest until every dollar is accounted for." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a movement that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. The union's financial activity wasn't isolated, along with the national transfers. State affiliates also moved significant funds through similar channels. Partner organizations amplified messaging campaigns, aligned PACs, increased spending targeting specific congressional districts. All of this happened within the same election cycle. When organizations move multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Investigators are now considering several possibilities. One is that the union is preparing to restructure its financial operations before new disclosure rules take effect. Another is that the union is attempting to establish permanent funding relationships with political organizations. A third possibility, the one worrying investigators the most, is that the union is attempting to create a parallel political infrastructure funded entirely by member dues. But today, oversight committees took that option off the table. They didn't delay. They didn't defer to union leadership. They didn't accept surface-level explanations. They launched a full investigation. What we're watching now is a test of accountability. The union wants to see if they can outlast public attention. Investigators want to prove that transparency applies to everyone. Parents want to ensure education funding serves students. And teachers want to know where their money actually goes. Tonight, we've heard from sources who are now reviewing additional filings. They say more disclosures are expected in the coming days. They say the scope of the investigation is expanding. And they say the union's decision to layer transfers through multiple entities is likely part of a broader strategy intended to obscure political spending. But investigators are not retreating. In fact, investigators are accelerating. Their response today, comprehensive, coordinated, and public, sent a message to the union that the era of unexamined spending is over, and it sent a message to members that their concerns are finally being heard. As the investigation continues, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the union hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the committee's action was timely. It exposed a financial structure that operated in shadows. It validated concerns that members had raised for years. And it established that nonprofit status does not guarantee immunity. What happens next will depend on what the union does in the next few weeks. If they cooperate fully, this moment will be remembered as a turning point toward transparency. If they resist, investigators have already shown they are prepared for a prolonged inquiry. They have shown they are ready to follow every dollar. And tonight, for the first time in years, the union appears to be on defense. Their headquarters is quiet, too quiet. And when powerful organizations go quiet, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the union learned something they should have known all along. Member dues are not political slush funds. Nonprofit status is not a shield for activism. And transparency is not optional. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The filing is public. The investigation is active. And accountability is coming. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds. And tonight, for the first time in years, the union appears to be on defense. Their headquarters is quiet, too quiet. And when powerful organizations go quiet, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the union learned something they should have known all along. Member dues are not political slush funds. Nonprofit status is not a shield for activism. And transparency is not optional. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The filing is public. The investigation is active. And accountability is coming. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.